Today we're plummeting into the surreal world of MDK, a wild and weird third-person action game originating from some of the creators of the Earthworm Jim series, along with a sequel that was somehow drenched in even more absurdity. So let's make deep critique and dive in. The Shiny Entertainment team, fresh off of their work on Earthworm Jim 1 and 2, and also notably fresh off of being bought out by Interplay, would follow up their success by developing their first game in 3D and first game for PC with MDK, released in 1997 and eventually ported to the Mac and PS1 that same year. One of the main designers, Nick Brutti, has said publicly it was created in response to years of working on much safer, family-friendly material previously, as he had not only worked on the Earthworm Jim series, but also titles like Aladdin and The Jungle Book on the Sega Genesis. So MDK, unofficially standing for Murder, Death, Kill, would take a somewhat sharper edge, but still retaining some silliness, with the story of a reluctant janitor, Kurt Hectic, embarking on Mission Deliver Kindness, which is basically tasking him to destroy all of the aliens who have invaded Earth, stripping it of resources using giant mine crawlers, and led by the dastardly Gunter Glut. Kurt would have the support of Dr. Fluke Hawkins aboard the spaceship Jim Dandy, who has also created a cyborg dog with 2 legs and 4 arms, named Bones, and also Max, and along with Kurt's unique skin-tight coil suit, complete with a parachute thing, and let's not forget an arm-mounted chain gun which doubles as a super zoomy sniper rifle if reattached to Kurt's head. The doc will also send down various wacky power-ups during your quest, including punching balloon decoys, grenades, thumping hammers, and the world's smallest nukes, which are actually just glorified keycards, usually needed to bypass certain doorways. As you can probably see by now, MDK is a third-person action game with an emphasis on running and gunning, but a few other funky things going on as well. Each level starts off with a brief skydiving sequence as you disembark from the Jim Dandy down to the next mine crawler, dodging projectiles while also trying to grab random power-ups on the way down. Once you land, you will be in more familiar third-person shooter platformer territory, with fast and smooth movement, the ability to strafe, and while you can look up and down, your machine gun will generally do the aiming for you automatically. You can also jump, grab ledges, and utilize your coil suit's parachute to float around a little bit. The platforming is admittedly a little bit jank sometimes, with unclear collisions and hitboxes for sticking the landings and grabbing ledges, but those moments are few and far between and not really focused on very much. And one of the more innovative and technically impressive mechanics at the time of this game was Kurt's sniper mode, which has an adjustable 100 times magnification, even giving you a small camera view of your bullet as it flies to its destination, hopefully into an alien's brain. There are a handful of special sniper power-ups you can acquire as well, some of which needed for light puzzle-solving moments, such as lobbing mortar shots into tubes to take out these foes behind protective glass. Overall, this mode is executed well, adds a refreshing dimension to the gameplay, and provides some alternative tactics to the usual guns a-blazing approach. Not that there's anything wrong with that approach, the hectic moments of MDK are a blast, your perspective tilting and swerving with your speed, and a lot of development work was put into the software maintaining a solid 30 frames per second without requiring a GPU. The minimal art style with sharp angled lines and some dark areas with very little detail at all are very deliberately crafted with respect to machine performance, and still give this game a very distinct and memorable look without resorting to fog. It's no wonder this game became a benchmark for testing video cards back in the day, and even eventually became pre-installed on some first-generation iMac machines. I should say the PS1 version shown here also runs very smoothly and looks great, and has the benefit of more available colors on screen and some extra lighting effects, while compressing down some of the animations. I also prefer the controls on this version, but mouse and keyboard enthusiasts may want to stick to the PC one, and also be able to tweak the graphics to their liking. In total, there are 6 levels, each split up into several rooms or large arena-type areas, and connected by tunnels which help act as loading zones. And eventually there's some kind of boss battle which tends to either be straight-up action-focused, or sometimes more puzzly or sniper focused. So things overall do feel a bit on the short side, and it's not super difficult either, at least on normal mode. But some mild replayability is there if you wanted to try hard mode, or also completing the levels fast enough to actually save the city's residents of that particular area. But despite the short length, the game is just a ton of fun to blast through, with a unique mix of gameplay, hilarious absurdity, and some striking environments. It was a resounding success at the time, both critically and commercially, and the publishers Interplay were foaming at the mouth to immediately start work on a sequel. The designer Nick Brutti didn't want a repeat of getting burned out on Earthworm Jim, and had also just started work on a new game for his own development studio called Giants Citizen Kabuto, so Interplay ultimately decided to hand off MDK2 development duties to a fairly new little company called BioWare. At the time BioWare was chosen for developing the sequel, they were wrapping up their work on the first Baldur's Gate game, which would be a huge success and a big breakthrough for the studio. MDK2 wouldn't be their first action game, as their first game ever was Shattered Steel, a legally distinct MechWarrior sim, but MDK2 would be their first time developing for consoles. The game would be released for the Dreamcast in the spring of 2000, with a PC version to soon follow along, with a slightly updated PS2 port in 2001 titled MDK2 Armageddon, the version I played to get the footage you're seeing here. Ten years later, MDK2 would also get a port to Nintendo's WiiWare service, along with a remastered version called MDK2 HD for the PC. But we'll get into all the version differences later. Taking place directly after the events of the first game, Kurt, Max, and Doc's celebration would be cut short as they discover one more minecrawler headed towards Edmonton, Canada, and the battle for Earth's safety would be far from over as Kurt gets abducted at the end of the first stage by Schwang Schwing, a big alien dude. From here we would get introduced to playing as the other characters, as each of the game's 10 levels essentially alternate play between the three of them, each with their own very unique playstyles and mechanics, and varied level designs geared accordingly. Kurt's gameplay would be pretty faithful to the original, with fast-paced running and gunning interspersed with sniper puzzles and platforming. Max, the cigar-smoking cyborg dog, would be more focused on firepower, with the ability to equip any combination of 4 guns in his available hands, with your loadout becoming a continuously evolving mix of Gatling guns, Uzis, shotguns, and lasers. Oh, and he has a jetpack sometimes, with some sections of levels focusing on fuel management. Last and probably least, you will also need to play as Dr. Hawkins, with his stages having more of an adventure game feel, tracking down necessary items to progress to new areas, combine items into haphazard weaponry like the atomic toaster, but mostly you'll be bumbling around falling off of things with the most limited jumping and movement abilities of the three. So the 3 different characters do certainly add variety to the game, in a similar way that the sniper puzzles and minigame elements in MDK1 did, but here it's a bit more structured. Other than the game's final area, you are locked into that specific character for that stage. The downside being that if you're not a big fan of a certain character's controls or style, you're still just gonna have to deal with it for at least 3 levels of the game's entirety. So it kind of addresses the issue of the first game being pretty short, but you're not necessarily getting more of the frantic Kurt-style gameplay here. The game definitely does retain the surreal mix of absurdist humor along with striking visuals. Fully voiced cutscenes give the 3 characters a bit more depth and add a nice touch of vintage sci-fi comic book pulpiness to everything.
Let's put this sissy down! Heal Max.
Visually, it goes further beyond the minimal, sharp-angled look and adds a lot more intricate textures to the environments, and some of the stages feel absolutely huge in scope and make the overall universe feel more alive. One area that saw a big change from the original is in the game's difficulty, although this would be somewhat addressed in the various versions of the game. The Dreamcast version probably being the hardest, as the PC and PS2 reworked versions would add various difficulty modes to pick from, and the PS2 version would even add various visual cues to some of the puzzles, making it more obvious of what you need to do next. But even still, there are some really tough moments that will likely lead to some frustration, especially in some of the platforming bits. Falling off of stuff as Hawkins over and over again really slowed the pace of the game for me at times. And don't get me started on the final boss fight, which had a neat concept but ultimately became one of the most annoying things I've had to deal with in a video game in a long time. The reworked difficulty options and tweaks would be the main differences between the first 3 versions of MDK2, aside from differences in controls and mild graphical differences between platforms. And the PS2 version is generally considered to be the definitive version of the original game and probably uses the controller of choice. MDK2 on the Wii was an interesting occurrence though, with an all-new control scheme utilizing the Wiimote and nunchuck, but it does have some downgrades in graphics and sound in order to compress the file size small enough for being downloadable on the WiiWare service. MDK2 HD, which is still available to purchase today on Steam and GOG, keeps all the content intact from the PS2 version, but completely overhauls the 3D models, lighting, textures, and remasters the soundtrack. Keep in mind this remake is still from 2011, so you might run into some speed bumps getting it running on modern machines. Overall, if you like the first MDK, I would say with trepidation to give the sequel a try, but I'm personally feeling pretty split on my feelings on it. The multiple character thing does what it's set out to do and adds variety to the game, but for me it felt like it added a lot of annoying things, and I would have probably preferred either playing as Kurt the entire time, or maybe just the ability to change characters at will whenever the need arises, instead of locking you into a long level with a single one. I played this on normal difficulty, and while the challenge felt satisfying at times, some moments definitely ended up being completely brutal. I shudder to think of what Jinkies mode must be like. Complaints aside, I can't deny the game's creativity, and it's really a valiant effort to follow up on the original. But I think I prefer MDK1, with its more straightforward approach and unique aesthetic. It's really too bad we never got an MDK3, despite Interplay announcing plans for one in 2007. But if you're really craving more MDK-like action, you might be well served to check out Giant Citizen Kabuto from the same folks who made the first game, with some similarities in its third-person shooting action and sense of humor, along with some real-time strategy bits thrown in the mix. As always, thanks for watching, and special thanks to the folks supporting on Patreon and Twitch who picked MDK in the supporter poll for this month. And if you like run and guns, definitely check out the full retrospective of the Contra series I just finished recently. And we'll catch you next time.
Oh, thanks, mister.